The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence of my quiet Portland home. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, heart thudding a little faster than it should. Alex had mentioned he'd be bringing a friend, but I hadn't thought much of it. Just another college kid passing through. Listen to the end of the story. You'll wonder what happened to me and my grandson's friend, what he was doing in my room, and why we couldn't stop. I pulled the door open, and there he was. Tall, broad shoulders, a confidence that wasn't forced, just natural, like he belonged anywhere he stood. Tyler. Grandma, this is Tyler, Alex said, grinning, completely unaware of the shift in the air. Hope you don't mind. I brought him along. Tyler extended a hand, his grip firm, warm. His gaze met mine, steady, unreadable. Something in my stomach flipped. Of course, I don't mind, I said, forcing a smile, forcing normalcy. But something had already shifted, and I knew it. The house filled with the usual chaos of guests. Laughter, the clinking of ice in glasses, the smell of fresh burgers grilling on the stove. I moved between them, playing the perfect host, but every time I turned, my eyes caught his. It wasn't obvious. Not something anyone else would notice. Just small things. The way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his smile lingered a second too long. And then Alex, completely oblivious, threw gasoline on the fire. You wouldn't believe it, Grandma. Tyler's a magnet for women. I swear, they just throw themselves at him. I expected Tyler to laugh it off, but he didn't. Instead, he met my gaze, a flicker of amusement dancing behind those dark eyes. I guess some people find me approachable. A harmless comment. Just words. But the way he said it, my pulse stuttered. I turned back to the stove, hands gripping the spatula too tight. It was nothing. Just a young man. Just an innocent remark. Just a mistake to even think about it. The sun was brutal, scorching everything in sight. I wiped sweat from my forehead, glancing out the kitchen window. And there he was. Tyler. Shirtless. Muscles tense as he dug into the soil with a shovel, dirt sticking to his damp skin. His tanned shoulders glistened with sweat, every movement easy, powerful. He wasn't just working, he was owning that space like the whole world was watching. And God help me, I was watching too. I should have looked away. Gone back to washing dishes, folding laundry, anything but this. But my eyes had a mind of their own, locked onto the way his back flexed, the way his jaw tightened with effort. Then he looked up. Caught me. A slow smile spread across his lips. Not cocky. Not teasing. Just knowing. I jerked back from the window, heart pounding. What the hell was I doing? The rest of the day crawled by, my body restless, my mind worse. Every time I passed by the backyard, I felt his presence. He was just a guest. Just my grandson's friend. Nothing more. Then came the night. The house was quiet, lights dim. I was on my way to my bedroom when I passed the guest room. The door was cracked open, light flickering inside. A movie played on the screen, shadows moving across Tyler's face as he lay on the bed, one arm propped behind his head. Couldn't sleep? His voice was low, smooth. I hesitated in the doorway. Just heading to bed. He sat up slightly. You like horror? I blinked. Excuse me? He nodded toward the screen. Scary movies. I was about to start a new one. If you're interested. I should have said no. Should have kept walking. Instead, I stepped inside. Sat down on the far end of the bed, as far from him as possible. What are we watching? He smirked. Guess you'll find out. The movie started, but I barely noticed the plot. I was too aware of him beside me, too aware of the way the mattress dipped under his weight. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Then it happened. A sudden jump scare. A shriek from the speakers. I gasped, flinching without meaning to. And then, don't worry, Tyler murmured. I'm right here. His voice curled around me, warm, deep. My stomach twisted, my breath caught. It was a simple phrase meant to be nothing. So, why did it feel like everything? The day started like any other. By the evening, I knew it was anything but ordinary. Alex left in the morning, slinging his backpack over his shoulder and waving casually. Be back late, Grandma. His car disappeared down the road, leaving behind nothing but dust and silence. Silence. I wasn't used to it. The house had always been filled with sound. Alex's voice, the hum of the TV, the clatter of dishes. But now, there was only quiet in him. Tyler was still here. I thought he'd go out, take a walk, or hole up in his room, but when I came downstairs, I saw him on the porch. Leaning against the wooden railing, his gaze was locked on the horizon, watching the sky shift from orange to deep purple. You sit out here often? He asked without looking at me. I hesitated. Sometimes, I said, stepping out onto the porch. The air was warm, thick with the scent of pine and freshly cut grass. Tyler shifted slightly, making space for me on the wooden step. Without thinking, I sat down next to him. The silence between us wasn't awkward, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was charged. After a while, he exhaled, his voice softer this time. Do you ever think about starting over? The question caught me off guard. My fingers tensed against my knees. Starting over? I repeated. He nodded, finally turning to look at me. The way his eyes held mine made something in my chest tighten. Yeah. Just leaving the past behind. Finding something new. Someone new. A lump formed in my throat. I looked away, staring at the dark outlines of the trees. I don't know if it works like that, I admitted. Why not? His voice was steady, calm. People reinvent themselves all the time. Just because life turns out one way doesn't mean you have to stay stuck in it. I swallowed hard. For years, I had convinced myself that this was it. That the life I had, the quiet routines, the empty spaces, was all I had left. That I had already had my time, and now I was just waiting. Waiting for what? Tyler's gaze never wavered. He saw the hesitation in me, the way my body tensed. He leaned in slightly, voice dropping lower. You don't have to answer. I just wonder if you've ever let yourself think about it. I let out a slow breath. Maybe I hadn't. Maybe I was afraid to. The night deepened around us, the porch light casting a soft glow over his face. He studied me, reading something in my silence. And then he did something that sent a shiver down my spine. He reached out, slow, deliberate, and brushed a stray hair from my face. I froze. Not because it was too much, but because I didn't pull away. The house was dark, quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. The clock on the wall glowed 1:37 a.m. I told myself I was just getting a glass of water, but deep down I knew better. I wasn't sleeping. Not really. My mind had been racing ever since our conversation on the porch. Starting over. The words still echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of a life I had never thought could change. As I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. Tyler was already there. Sitting at the table, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, the other rubbing the back of his neck. His head lifted when he saw me. Couldn't sleep either? His voice was quiet, like he didn't want to break the stillness of the house. I shook my head. No. He gestured to the chair across from him. Join me? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I did. Still, I sat. The kitchen light was dim, casting a warm glow over the room. Tyler watched me as I reached for my own cup, fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. Been thinking about what we talked about earlier? He asked, his eyes never leaving mine. I let out a breath. Maybe. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Me too. We sat there for a while, sipping coffee that neither of us really needed, the silence stretching between us, thick, heavy, charged. Then he spoke again. You ever feel like you're just going through the motions? His voice was lower now. Slower. I swallowed hard, staring into my cup. Yeah. All the time. He nodded like he understood. Like he had lived in that same empty space. You deserve more than that. I exhaled, shaking my head. Tyler, it's not that simple. Maybe it is, he murmured. And then he reached across the table. Slowly, gently. Fingertips grazing the back of my hand before his palms settled over mine. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. I stared at our hands, at the way his thumb lightly traced over my skin. It was nothing. Just a touch. But my entire body reacted like it was something else, something much bigger than either of us was ready to admit. His voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke again. Sometimes, he said, leaning in just a little, you just have to feel. My breath hitched. I didn't answer. But I didn't move away either. The air between us was thick, charged with something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. Tyler's hand was still on mine, warm, steady, grounding me in a way that felt both dangerous and impossible to pull away from. I should have moved. I should have said something. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, breathing too fast, too shallow, watching the way his eyes flickered down to my lips. Then he leaned in. Slow. Deliberate. Like he was giving me time to stop him. But I didn't. His lips brushed against mine, barely a whisper of a kiss, and every nerve in my body lit up at once. I sucked in a sharp breath, but before I could think, before I could stop, I was already kissing him back. Soft at first, then deeper, like we had both been waiting for this moment without realizing it. His fingers slid up my arm, resting lightly on my jaw, tilting my face toward him as he kissed me again, slower this time, as if memorizing the feel of me. And God help me, I let him. I melted into it, into him, into the warmth of his mouth, the press of his hand. My pulse hammered in my ears, my skin burning under his touch. This was wrong. I knew it. And yet, I couldn't stop. The chair scraped against the floor as Tyler shifted closer, his other hand resting on my waist. I felt myself tilting toward him, giving in, wanting more. No. What am I doing? Reality crashed down around me like ice water. I jerked back, heart pounding, my breathing ragged. Tyler's eyes were dark, questioning, searching my face for answers I didn't have. I can't, I stammered, pushing back my chair so fast it nearly toppled over. Linda. But I didn't let him finish. I turned and ran. Through the hallway, up the stairs, slamming my bedroom door behind me like I could somehow lock away everything that had just happened. My fingers trembled as I pressed them to my lips. I could still feel him. The heat, the softness, the way he made me feel alive. And that terrified me more than anything. This was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. But deep down, in the place I refused to acknowledge, I already knew the truth. I wanted him. And I had no idea how to stop. I pressed my back against the door, my pulse racing so fast it made me dizzy. My hands trembled as I ran them through my hair, trying to steady my breath, trying to force my mind to make sense of what had just happened. I had kissed him. I had kissed Tyler. And worse, I had wanted it. I could still feel the warmth of his mouth on mine, the way his fingers had traced my skin like I was something fragile. My lips tingled, and my body betrayed me, craving more even as my brain screamed at me to forget it. I squeezed my eyes shut. It was a mistake. It had to be. A knock at the door made me jump. Soft. Hesitant. Linda. My breath caught in my throat. Tyler. I didn't answer. Another knock. Talk to me. His voice was quiet, gentle, but there was something else beneath it. Something raw. I couldn't do this. I turned the lock, sealing myself away. Go to bed, Tyler. A pause. Then a sigh. Okay. Footsteps. Fading down the hallway. I waited until I heard his door close before exhaling the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My body was betraying me, every nerve still buzzing, but I had to end this. before it went too far. I had to stay away from him, but the universe had other plans. The next morning, I avoided him. I stayed in my room longer than usual, waiting until I was sure he had gone outside before slipping into the kitchen for coffee. But as I poured my cup, I felt it, his presence. He was standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't look up. "Morning," he said, voice unreadable. I forced myself to act normal, casual, like nothing had happened. "Morning," I murmured, taking a sip of coffee that scalded my tongue. I should have left, walked right past him, kept my distance. But my feet wouldn't move, and the silence stretched between us, thick with everything we weren't saying. Finally, he spoke. "Are we just gonna pretend last night didn't happen?" I set my cup down too hard. "It was a mistake, Tyler." He tilted his head, eyes locked onto mine. "Didn't feel like a mistake." I swallowed. "You don't understand. Then help me understand." His voice was steady, but his hands were clenched at his sides. He wasn't just asking. He was demanding answers. I should have walked away. I needed to walk away. Instead, I whispered, "We can't do this." Something flickered in his eyes. A challenge. "Why not?"
Why not?
Because I was older. Because I was supposed to be the responsible one. Because this could never, ever happen. Because I wanted it too much. I turned to leave, but he moved faster, stepping in front of me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body. "You're running," he said softly. "But we both know you don't want to." I looked up at him, my resolve crumbling. I hated that he was right. I hated that I wanted him to be. And then, before I could stop myself, I kissed him again. Morning came far too quickly, dragging the weight of the night before with it. I didn't sleep. How could I? My mind replayed every moment of what had happened in the kitchen, the heat of his lips, the way my resolve crumbled like ash in a breeze. I told myself I'd act normal. I told myself I'd keep my distance. But as I stepped into the dining room, there he was. Tyler sat at the table with a cup of coffee, his hair slightly tousled, wearing that same calm confidence he always did. Alex sat across from him, oblivious, scrolling through his phone while he shoveled eggs into his mouth. "Morning, Grandma." Alex grinned. "You sleep okay?" I forced a smile, hoping it looked natural.
"Fine, sweetheart."
I felt Tyler's eyes on me, but I didn't dare meet them. Breakfast passed in a haze. Tyler was quiet, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. I avoided looking his way, keeping my focus on Alex's rambling stories about some project at school. But no matter how hard I tried to act normal, my hands betrayed me, trembling as I reached for the coffee pot. When I accidentally spilled a bit on the table, Tyler was the first to react, grabbing a napkin to mop it up. "It's fine," he said, his voice low, his hand brushing mine as he took the pot from me. I froze. Alex didn't notice a thing, too busy laughing at a meme on his phone. But Tyler's touch lingered a second too long, and when he glanced up at me, I knew exactly what he was thinking. I excused myself as quickly as I could, retreating to the kitchen under the pretense of cleaning up. My heart pounded, and I gripped the counter for support, staring out the window like it could somehow offer answers. I needed to stop this, before it went too far. But that was the problem, wasn't it? It already had. Later, after Alex left to meet some friends, I found myself alone with Tyler. The air in the house was stifling, thick with unspoken words. I tried to keep myself busy, wiping down counters that were already clean, avoiding his gaze.
But of course, he followed me.
"Linda." His voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. "We need to talk." I shook my head.
Tyler, no.
"Whatever this is." "You feel it too," he interrupted, stepping closer. I stepped back, bumping into the counter. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice wavered, betraying me. He gave me a look, steady, unyielding. "Yes, I do. I know you feel the same way I do." And I don't regret any of it. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Don't, I whispered. Please don't. But he didn't stop. I've tried to fight it, he admitted, his voice dropping lower, more vulnerable. But I can't. And I don't think you can either. I felt the tears welling up before I could stop them. This is wrong. I choked out, shaking my head. Tyler, whatever this is, it can't happen. Why not? He demanded, stepping closer until there was almost no space between us. Tell me why, Linda. Because it'll destroy everything. I snapped, the words spilling out before I could catch them. Alex, the life I've built, the person I'm supposed to be, it'll destroy all of it. He paused, his jaw tightening. And what about you? What about me? Doesn't what you want matter? I stared at him, unable to answer. My chest ached, my mind a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't untangle. I can't do this, I finally said, my voice breaking. I won't. Tyler's face softened, but he didn't move away. I'll give you space, he said quietly, his gaze holding mine. But don't pretend this didn't happen. Don't pretend you don't feel it. I turned away, unable to face him, because he was right. And that terrified me. I turned away from Tyler, gripping the edge of the counter like it could somehow hold me together. My mind raced, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the world. I needed space.
Air.
Anything to get away from the heat of his words and the truth in his eyes. I'm going for a walk, I muttered, avoiding his gaze. He didn't stop me, but I could feel his eyes on my back as I grabbed my jacket and pushed through the front door. The evening air was cool, crisp, biting against my skin. It was a welcome relief from the suffocating tension inside the house. I walked aimlessly down the street, hoping the rhythm of my steps would calm the storm in my chest. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the weight of Tyler's words. You feel it too. He wasn't wrong, but that didn't mean it was right. Lost in thought, I barely noticed the approaching car until it pulled to a stop beside me. The passenger window rolled down, and a familiar voice called out. Linda? Is that you? I turned, startled. It was Carol. Carol lived a few blocks over. She was my neighbor, my occasional confidant, and someone who had known me long enough to see through most of my lies. Her dark curls framed a face etched with concern as she leaned across the passenger seat. What are you doing out here this late? She asked. Just needed some air, I said, forcing a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. Carol frowned, but nodded. Hop in. It's getting chilly. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was company, but the look on her face told me she wasn't taking no for an answer. With a sigh, I climbed into the car, the warmth of the heater wrapping around me. Rough day, she asked as she started driving. You could say that, I murmured, staring out the window. Carol glanced at me, her brow furrowing. Linda, you know you can talk to me, right? I hesitated. Carol wasn't just nosy. She was sharp. If I gave her even a hint of what was going on, she'd dig until she found the truth. But maybe that was what I needed. Have you ever felt trapped? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carol's grip on the wheel tightened. Trapped how? In your own life. Like everything you've built is just a box. And you don't know how to get out of it without breaking everything. She didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the road. Finally, she let out a soft sigh. All the time, she admitted. But breaking the box doesn't mean you destroy everything. Sometimes it just means you're brave enough to make space for something new. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Something new. Was that what Tyler was? Something new in a life I'd let grow stale and predictable? Carol pulled up in front of my house, cutting the engine but not making a move to leave. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. Linda, whatever's going on, just be careful. Okay. I swallowed hard, nodding. Thanks, Carol. She smiled faintly, squeezing my hand before I climbed out of the car. When I walked back into the house, the tension hit me like a wall. Tyler was still there, standing by the window, his silhouette framed by the glow of the porch light. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "Fine," I said, brushing past him toward the kitchen. But he followed. "You don't have to do this," he said, stopping in the doorway. "Do what?" I snapped, spinning to face him. "Run." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and inescapable. Before I could respond, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made both of us freeze. I turned toward the window just in time to see Alex stepping out of a silver sedan. But he wasn't alone. A young woman climbed out after him, laughing as she pushed her hair back from her face. "Who is that?" Tyler asked, his voice tight. "No idea," I muttered, but my chest tightened as Alex and the woman made their way toward the door. When they stepped inside, Alex grinned, his arms slung casually around her shoulders. "Grandma, Tyler, this is Jess," he said. "We met in class. Thought I'd bring her by for dinner." Jess smiled warmly, her eyes flicking between me and Tyler as she extended a hand. "It's nice to meet you both," she said. Her presence changed everything. Tyler's posture stiffened, his jaw tight as he nodded at her. And I suddenly felt like I was standing on a tightrope, the weight of everything I was trying to hide threatening to pull me under. This wasn't just about me and Tyler anymore. It was about Alex. And Jess. And the fragile web we were all caught in, one wrong move away from falling apart. The front door slammed shut, and Alex's voice echoed from the hall. "Don't wait up, Grandma. I'll be back late." The sound of his car pulling out of the driveway faded into the distance, leaving the house eerily quiet. Too quiet. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my hands gripping the counter as if it could anchor me. Tyler was still there, leaning against the doorway, his presence as inescapable as the tension crackling between us. For a while, neither of us said a word. Then he moved. One step closer. "Linda," he said, his voice low, soft, but filled with something that made my heart race. I turned to face him, my breath catching as I met his gaze. His eyes were dark, intense, and there was no mistaking the way they lingered on me. "Don't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Tyler, please. We can't." But I didn't step back. He took another step, closing the distance between us. "Why not?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me why we can't." I opened my mouth to answer, to say anything that would stop this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, as he reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from my face. The touch sent a shiver down my spine. "Tyler." He leaned closer, his hand sliding to my cheek, his thumb grazing my skin. "If you don't want this," he murmured, his voice steady, "tell me to stop." This was it. The moment where everything would either spiral out of control or come crashing to a halt. I should have stopped him. I should have said no. But I didn't. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe as his lips brushed against mine, tentative at first, then deeper when I didn't pull away. It was everything I'd tried to tell myself I didn't want. And it was overwhelming. But then, a knock at the door. Sharp.
Loud.
Cutting through the haze like a knife. I jerked away from Tyler, my heart slamming against my ribs as I stared at him, wide-eyed. He looked just as startled, his hand dropping to his side. The knock came again, more urgent this time. "Who could that be?" Tyler asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead as I moved toward the door, each step heavier than the last. When I finally reached it, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My mind raced with possibilities. Alex? Jess? Someone who knew? I took a deep breath and opened the door. It wasn't Alex. A woman stood on the porch, her face partially hidden by the shadow of the porch light. She looked vaguely familiar, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Linda Bennett?" she asked, her voice steady. I nodded, my stomach twisting. "Yes." She shifted, glancing past me into the house before her eyes landed back on mine. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," she said, her tone almost apologetic. "But we need to talk. It's about Tyler." The air rushed out of my lungs. "What do you mean?" I managed to choke out, glancing back at Tyler, who had stepped into the hallway, his face pale. The woman straightened, her expression hardening. "I'm his sister, and I think you already know what this is about." My blood turned to ice. Tyler's face fell, his confident demeanor cracking for the first time. "Rachel, don't," he started, but she cut him off. "Don't what?" "Don't tell her the truth," she snapped, her eyes narrowing at him. Then she turned back to me, her gaze piercing. "I don't know what's been going on here, but I can tell you one thing. This has to stop." The weight of her words crushed me. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. She wasn't just talking to Tyler. She was talking to me. Because she was right. This was my fault. I had let this happen. I had crossed lines I should never have even approached. And now it wasn't just my life on the verge of collapse. It was his too. My voice broke, and I took a step back, shaking my head. I didn't mean for this to happen. Rachel's expression softened, but only slightly. "Maybe not. But you didn't stop it either." The truth of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Tyler stepped forward, his jaw tight, his voice desperate. "Rachel, stop. You don't understand." "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger this time. "She does." Tyler turned to me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't name. "Linda." "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. My chest ached, my throat tight with unshed tears. "She's right, Tyler. This has to stop. Whatever this is, it has to stop." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Rachel exhaled, stepping back toward the porch steps. "I'll give you a moment," she said, her voice softer now. "But Tyler, we're leaving tonight. This ends here." As she walked away, the weight of everything settled over me, suffocating and unrelenting. Tyler turned to me, his expression raw, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't regret it." Tears slipped down my cheeks as I shook my head.
Ido.
And with that, I walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway as the door quietly clicked shut behind me.